You don't live here. I'm calling the police right now. The words detonated across the manicured lawns of Meadowbrook subdivision like a flashbang grenade. Marcus Reynolds stood frozen on his own front lawn, drill still humming in his right hand, mounting bracket clutched in his left, staring at the woman who had just erupted from the house next door with her phone raised like a loaded weapon. This creates instant high stakes by establishing a Karen archetype confrontation. The introduction then pivots to provide a devastating irony. Marcus, a man who had spent 17 years apprehending some of America's most dangerous fugitives, men with nothing to lose and everything to gain from his death, now found himself more afraid of Linda Whitmore's iPhone than he had ever been in any midnight raid or armed standoff. He had faced down cartel enforcers in Laredo without his heart rate breaking 80. He had executed warrants on meth labs where one wrong move meant death. He had testified against organized crime figures who had put prices on his head. But right now, watching his neighbor's finger hover over those 3 digits, 911, Marcus felt a fear more primitive and pervasive than anything he had experienced in nearly 2 decades of federal service. Because Marcus knew something Linda Whitmore didn't consider and didn't care to understand, what happened in the next 5 minutes wouldn't be determined by facts, credentials, or constitutional rights. It would be determined by which story the responding officers believed before they even stepped out of their patrol cars, and history had already written that script in blood. Marcus Reynolds had spent 17 years learning how to read a room in 3 seconds flat. It was the skill that kept you alive when you kicked down the door of a meth lab in rural Georgia or when you approached a fugitive's vehicle in a truck stop parking lot at 2 a.m. He could catalog exits, assess threats, and calculate risk before most people registered he'd entered the space. He'd tracked bail jumpers through the Appalachian backwoods, executed federal warrants on gang-safe houses in East Atlanta, and testified in courtrooms where cartel associates sat in the gallery taking notes on his family. His service jacket was thick with commendations, thin on complaints, and marked by the kind of quiet competence that made supervisors sleep better at night. But for all those years, Marcus had never owned anything permanent. His addresses read like a federal deployment manifest: 6-month leases in Memphis, extended stays near the courthouse in Savannah, a series of furnished apartments chosen for proximity to field offices rather than the quality of the school district. He'd protected other people's American dreams while his own remained theoretical, deferred, always 18 months away from the next assignment. Until now. The closing on 2847 Meadowbrook Drive happened on a Friday afternoon in late August, all signatures and earnest explanations of escrow from a title agent who seemed genuinely pleased for him. Marcus sat in that conference room holding the keys, actual brass keys on a realtor's branded keychain, and felt something unlock in his chest that had nothing to do with doors. This was permanence. This was investment. This was the life he'd imagined during those long stakeouts and longer drives between jurisdictions. Meadowbrook was everything the brochure promised: tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes with 2-car garages, the kind of neighborhood where people jogged at dawn and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. It represented arrival, the reward for service, the notion that credentials and character could purchase entry into spaces once closed to people who looked like him. Marcus drove through those gates for the first time as an owner, not a visitor, and allowed himself to believe that he'd finally earned his way home. Marcus moved in on the first Saturday of September under a sky so blue it looked digitally enhanced. He'd rented a truck, enlisted his brother and 2 colleagues, and by noon they transferred the essential furniture from storage to residence. He noticed the woman next door almost immediately, blonde, 50s, standing at her kitchen window with a coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips, watching. Marcus raised a hand in greeting. She didn't wave back, just continued staring with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe. New neighbors were always interesting. Over the first week, Marcus made a point of introducing himself to the households within immediate proximity. The Johnsons 2 doors down were warm, if slightly startled. The retired couple across the street offered polite smiles and a vague promise to have him over for dinner sometime. The young family with 3 kids seemed friendly enough, though their conversation never extended past weather observations and compliments on his SUV. But Linda Whitmore, He learned her name from his realtor's neighborhood directory, never approached, never introduced herself, never acknowledged his repeated attempts at eye contact when they were both outside. Still, he caught her watching. When he carried in his weightlifting equipment. When he assembled a shelving unit on the front porch. When the locksmith came to rekey the deadbolts. Always from that same kitchen window, always with that same unreadable expression. Marcus shrugged it off. Suburban curiosity was a known phenomenon. Some people had too much time and too little stimulation. He had more important concerns, setting up his home office for remote work days, painting the second bedroom that would serve as a guest room when his mother visited, installing the smart home system he'd been researching for months. The house slowly transformed from empty investment to inhabited home. Marcus hung photos from his academy graduation, positioned his bookshelves, programmed his coffee maker. He fell asleep each night with the kind of satisfaction that comes from building something tangible. The watching neighbor was an irritation, perhaps, but hardly a threat. He'd faced actual threats. This was just Atlanta suburbia adjusting to a new resident. Linda Whitmore felt at the moment she saw the black SUV pull into the driveway of 2847, Meadowbrook Drive. Not a thought, exactly, more like a vibration in her chest, an alarm her body recognized before her mind could articulate why. A black man. Alone. Unloading boxes from a truck as if he owned the place. The Johnsons had never mentioned selling to someone like that. Surely they would have given the neighborhood some warning, some preparation, some chance to understand what was happening to their property values. She watched him that first day with growing unease that calcified into conviction, something was wrong here. Over the following days, Linda began documenting. She photographed him carrying furniture through the front door. Was that a weight bench? She noted the times he came and went, late evenings, odd hours, the schedule of someone with something to hide. When the Amazon delivery driver dropped packages on his porch, Linda intercepted him at her own mailbox to ask casual questions about the new resident. The driver shrugged. Nice guy. Tips well. Linda's phone became an evidence log. Photos of his SUV at different times of day. Screenshots of unfamiliar vehicles parked in front of his house, visitors, she was certain, engaged in some coordinated operation. She posted in the Meadowbrook Neighbors Facebook group, carefully worded observations about increased activity and unfamiliar faces and the importance of remaining vigilant. Several neighbors liked her posts. A few commented with vague agreements about safety first. Her mental catalog expanded with each observation. Security cameras, what was he hiding? Late arrivals after dark, what business kept those hours? Weightlifting equipment and a heavy bag installed in the garage, was he preparing for violence? When other black men visited on a Sunday afternoon, laughing and carrying what looked like cases of beer, Linda's suspicions crystallized into certainty. She was watching something criminal unfold in real time, and her neighbors were too naive or too intimidated to say what they all knew was true. This man did not belong here, and the only question was what crime he was planning to commit. 3 weeks after moving in, Marcus spent his Saturday morning on a task he'd been postponing, installing exterior security cameras. Standard procedure for a law enforcement officer, particularly one who testified against violent offenders who had friends, resources, and long memories. He'd already mounted 2 cameras covering the front entrance and was drilling pilot holes for the third when he sensed movement in his peripheral vision. Linda Whitmore emerged from her house like a prosecutor approaching the bench, phone already raised and recording. What do you think you're doing? Her voice carried across both lawns, sharp enough to make Marcus's hand slip on the drill. He turned, confused but not yet alarmed. Installing security cameras. I'm Marcus Reynolds, by the way. I don't think we've officially met. You don't live here. The words came out as an accusation, not a question. I've been watching you for weeks. I know what you're doing. I've documented everything. Marcus felt the situation tilting toward danger. He kept his voice level, his movements slow. Ma'am, I own this house. I closed on it 3 weeks ago. If you'd like, I can show you my driver's license with this address. I'm calling the police right now. Linda's finger was already moving across her screen, her eyes never leaving Marcus. He heard her voice shift into the phone, taking on a tone he recognized from hundreds of witness statements, calculated urgency designed to trigger maximum response. Yes, I need police immediately at 2847, Meadowbrook Drive. There's an aggressive black male claiming to live here but clearly breaking in. He's installing surveillance equipment. He's being threatening. Please hurry. Marcus's stomach dropped. Not the words themselves, though those were bad enough. It was the phrase, aggressive black male, that sealed his fate. He knew exactly how this would go. Officers would arrive primed for confrontation, expecting danger, seeing threat before they processed any other information. His 17 years of service, his federal credentials, his actual ownership of the property, none of that would matter in the crucial first 60 seconds when decisions about force got made. He slowly placed the drill on the ground and prepared to survive the next hour. Chapter 5, 47 minutes on the curb. The first cruiser arrived in 4 minutes. The second and third came 90 seconds later. The fourth pulled up just as 2 detectives in an unmarked sedan blocked the driveway exit. Marcus watched the coordinated response unfold with professional detachment even as his heart hammered against his ribs. This was a felony-level deployment, multiple units, aggressive positioning, hands hovering near weapons. Linda had done her job well. Hands where we can see them. The command came before anyone asked a question. Marcus raised his palms slowly, deliberately, keeping his body language as non-threatening as biomechanics allowed. I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Marcus Reynolds. My credentials are in my back right pocket. I'm the homeowner. This is a misunderstanding. The lead detective, Sergeant Holbrook according to his nameplate, approached with his partner flanking. Don't move. We'll retrieve your identification. Holbrook pulled the credential case from Marcus's pocket, flipped it open, examined the badge and ID card with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for obviously fake IDs at college bars. Anybody can buy one of these online. Call the Marshal Service. Verify my employment. I'll give you my supervisor's direct number. You'll sit right here while we sort this out. Holbrook pointed to the curb. Not a request. Marcus sat, hands visible on his knees, in front of his own home, on his own property, while neighbors emerged from their houses like spectators at a traffic accident. Linda stood near the detectives, arms crossed, vindicated. She'd been right to call. Look how many officers it took to contain this threat. The verification call took 35 minutes. 35 minutes of sitting on sun-heated concrete while Sergeant Holbrook reached an administrative line that couldn't immediately confirm Marcus's employment on a Saturday. 35 minutes of watching his neighbors watch him, the Johnsons on their porch, the retired couple by their mailbox, the young family peering through their front window. Not one of them approached the police. Not one vouched for him. Not one suggested this might be a catastrophic mistake. Marcus made eye contact with each of them, memorizing faces, cataloging silence. The humiliation was comprehensive, surgical. This was what citizenship looked like when filtered through someone else's fear. This was the price of living while black in Meadowbrook. Deputy Marshal James Chen was in the hardware store picking up cabinet hinges when his phone lit up with an alert from the agency's communication system. Officer needs assistance, local law enforcement on scene, Marcus Reynolds. James abandoned his cart mid-aisle and made the 15-minute drive to Meadowbrook in 9 minutes, his federal emergency lights clearing traffic. He arrived to find his partner sitting on a curb surrounded by local police like a suspect at a crime scene. The fury that flooded James's system was cold, clarifying, and barely controlled. He approached the scene with his credentials raised and his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd had enough. Deputy Marshal James Chen. Someone want to tell me why you have a federal agent detained on his own property? Sergeant Holbrook's demeanor shifted instantly, not quite deference, but a recalculation of the power dynamics. We responded to a burglary call. We're just verifying. Verifying? James's voice could have etched glass. You've had his federal credentials for 35 minutes. You could have called our duty officer. You could have run his ID through federal databases. Instead you have him sitting on a curb like a suspect. Where's your supervisor? The conversation lasted 7 more minutes. The confirmation of Marcus's employment came through during minute 3. By minute 5, Sergeant Holbrook was offering perfunctory apologies about proceeding with appropriate caution and no harm intended. By minute 7, the patrol cars were pulling away, the detectives were retreating to their sedan, and Linda Whitmore was slipping back into her house without a word. But the damage was comprehensive and irreversible. Marcus stood slowly, his legs stiff from 47 minutes on concrete, and saw 17-year-old Destiny Williams from 3 houses down lowering her phone. She met his eyes, nodded once, and went inside. 20 minutes later, Marcus's phone began vibrating with notifications as the video spread across TikTok with a caption that summarized the entire incident in 14 words. They really detained a U.S. Marshal on his own lawn because a Karen called the cops. The video hit 100,000 views in the first hour. By dinner time, it had crossed 800,000. By Sunday morning, Marcus's face was on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News with cheerings that varied by network bias but agreed on the essential facts. Federal law enforcement officer detained on his own property after neighbor's 911 call. Journalists arrived in Meadowbrook by Sunday afternoon, filming stand-ups in front of 2847 Meadowbrook Drive and knocking on doors for neighbor reactions. Linda Whitmore's real estate firm received its first angry call at 6:47 a.m. Sunday. By noon, the receptionist had logged 217 more. Monday morning, Linda was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Monday afternoon, her social media history went public, 5 years of posts about declining neighborhoods, property values, and the wrong element moving in. By Tuesday, she was terminated, her professional headshot removed from the company website, her license under review by the State Real Estate Commission. Marcus gave a single televised statement from his front porch, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood they would be replayed and analyzed and weaponized by people across every ideological spectrum. I've spent 17 years serving this country by apprehending dangerous fugitives. I've faced armed criminals who would kill me without hesitation. But I shouldn't have to fear my own neighbors more than the people I chase. I shouldn't have to question whether I'm safe in the home I purchased legally and work for honestly. The statement became a flashpoint. Conservative outlets questioned why Marcus played the race card. Liberal outlets held him up as proof of systemic racism. Legal analysts debated civil rights violations. The story metastasized beyond the facts into the larger conversation about racial bias, weaponized 911 calls, and who gets to feel safe in America. Linda and her husband went into hiding by Wednesday, their home dark, their cars in the garage. The Homeowners Association issued a statement about not reflecting the values of our diverse community. And the neighbors who'd watched from their porches that Saturday were now pressed by journalists to explain their silence, their inaction, their failure to vouch for a man being detained on his own lawn. Marcus filed the federal civil rights lawsuit 15 months later, after careful consultation with attorneys who specialized in Section 1983 claims. The case was straightforward legally but devastating emotionally, every detail of that Saturday afternoon dissected in depositions, interrogatories, and expert witness reports. Discovery was an archaeological dig through Linda Whitmore's prejudices, and what it unearthed was damning. Her phone records revealed 14 911 calls over 5 years. Every single call involved a person of color in Meadowbrook, a black teenager, loitering, who turned out to be waiting for his friend, a Hispanic landscaping crew, acting suspicious, who were actually working 2 houses down, a black woman, trespassing, who was a realtor showing a property. Not one call resulted in arrest, citation, or evidence of any actual crime. Linda's text messages showed her referring to Marcus as that thug and speculating to neighbors about drug dealing, gang activity, and criminal enterprises, all without a single piece of supporting evidence. The trial lasted 8 days. Expert witnesses testified about the phenomenon of weaponized whiteness, the historical pattern of white women summoning state violence against black men through claims of threat or transgression. Marcus took the stand for 6 hours, describing the lasting impact with quiet devastation, the hypervigilance that prevented him from working in his own yard without calculating which neighbors were watching, the reluctance to have friends visit because he knew their presence would be documented and questioned, the erosion of the sense of safety he'd spent 17 years protecting for others. Linda's attorney argued she'd acted out of genuine concern, not racial bias. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and returned a verdict that suggested they found that argument unconvincing, $1.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Marcus sat in the courtroom as the verdict was read and felt nothing resembling victory. Money couldn't restore what had been taken. Money couldn't erase the memory of sitting on that curb. Money couldn't prevent the next Linda Whitmore from making the next call about the next Marcus Reynolds. He walked out of the federal courthouse into bright Atlanta sunshine and wondered what justice actually looked like when the wound never fully healed. 6 months after the settlement, Marcus still lived at 2847 Meadowbrook Drive. Linda and her husband had moved away in disgrace 3 months earlier, their house purchased by a young couple who introduced themselves on their first day and seemed genuinely horrified when they learned the history. But Marcus struggled with what home meant now. Every time he stepped outside, he calculated which neighbors were watching. Every time a police siren sounded in the distance, his body tensed with muscle memory of that Saturday. He knew his neighbors' faces, and remembered exactly which ones had watched from their porches without intervening. He decided to host a gathering. Not a celebration or a barbecue or a housewarming, those implied joy he didn't feel. This would be a reckoning. He hand-delivered invitations to every household on the block. Please join me for a conversation about what happened, what we learned, and what we do next. 15 households showed up on a mild April evening, gathering in his backyard with the awkward energy of people who knew this wouldn't be comfortable. Marcus didn't perform gratitude or ease their discomfort. He asked questions that landed like accusations because they were, "What did you think when you saw me sitting on that curb?" Silence. "Why didn't anyone come outside to vouch for me?" More silence. "What will you do differently next time?" Finally, haltingly, answers came. Some neighbors apologized, their remorse apparently genuine. Some made excuses about not knowing what to do, not wanting to interfere with police. Some admitted they'd assumed he must have done something to warrant that response. Marcus let the discomfort build before he spoke again. "Being not racist isn't enough. I need you to understand that. You can believe you have no prejudice, that you would never call the police on a neighbor like Linda did, and still be complicit. You have to actively interrupt bias when you see it. You have to be willing to make it uncomfortable for people like Linda before they call 911 on people like me. Because the next time, the person sitting on that curb might not have a federal badge. They might not have a partner who can come rescue them. And they might not survive the encounter." The gathering ended without neat resolution, but with commitments to do better that Marcus knew some would honor and others would forget. As the last guests left, Marcus stood alone in his backyard and looked at his home, truly his now, earned not just through purchase but through surviving and demanding accountability. He walked to his front door and knelt down, installing a new doormat he'd ordered the week before. It read simply, "Welcome home." A statement of defiant permanence. A challenge to anyone who thought fear could evict him. And a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, his neighbors had learned to see clearly.